A surge of violence in Arkansas's capital began in the late 1980s and, according to law enforcement officials, never fully disappeared, only shifted in intensity and location. While drugs were already an issue, it was the rapid rise of gang activity that really pushed the city over the edge. That summer, Crips started moving into the area around 23rd Street, setting up and making their presence known. Not long after, Blood-affiliated groups followed, claiming 21st Street as their territory. One group in particular, the 5 Deuce Bloodstone Villains, helped introduce Little Rock to a much more intense level of gang rivalry. As they brought in new members, they fully embraced the identity that came with being a Blood. Tensions between them and the 23rd Street Wolfe Street Crips, who were influenced by the East Coast Crips, escalated fast. At first it was just fights, but that didn't last long. One weekend marked a shift when a Blood member fired a shot into the air, sending a clear message that things were going way beyond fistfights. According to members of the Wolfe Street Crips, a lot of them used to be cool before gangs got involved. But once the politics kicked in, everything changed. As soon as some of them got put on and started claiming blood, the others stopped seeing them as friends and started calling them crabs, treating them like enemies from that point on. Violence picked up quickly, shootings became common, sometimes weekly, sometimes even daily. The crack epidemic only made things worse, adding more fuel to everything. Gangs started taking over abandoned houses in certain spots, turning them into hangouts, Crip houses and blood houses, where they sold drugs, met up, and planned moves against each other. By the end of it, Little Rock's gang problem had turned into something way deeper and more dangerous than it had ever been before. In 1994, 2 young members of the 21st Street Bloodstone Villains went on a string of robberies, escalating their actions to a dangerous level. During one incident, they stormed into a local store, armed with what witnesses described as machine guns, pointing them at customers and the owner's wife while demanding money, threatening to kill everyone inside if they didn't comply. But the situation flipped in an instant. As one of the gunmen turned away, the store owner reacted fast, reaching for his own weapon and opening fire, killing one of the attackers and ending the threat right there. The killing didn't just end the robbery, it sparked retaliation. Word spread quickly through Little Rock, and the 21st Street Bloods took it personal. They began threatening the store owner, trying to intimidate him and create fear throughout the area. Tensions rose, and it was clear they wanted revenge. The Bloods were applying heavy pressure, vandalizing buildings, breaking windows, and doing whatever they could to strike fear into the neighborhood. The only thing that kept the situation from escalating further against them was the ongoing war with the Wolfe Street Crips. At the time, the Crips were applying heavy pressure, and by most accounts, they were hitting the Bloods harder than they were getting hit back. That constant conflict kept the Bloods focused elsewhere and stretched thin. Meanwhile, the Wolfe Street Crips weren't just reacting, they were moving strategically. Members would go into 21st Street dressed head to toe in blue, shouting out Crip slang, intentionally provoking a response. When Blood members approached, thinking it was a simple confrontation, they'd be met with a setup, multiple Crips jumping out and opening fire. It wasn't just random violence anymore. It had turned into calculated retaliation and street tactics, where every move was meant to trap or send a message to them. Still, the Bloodstone Villains and Westside Pirus weren't the type to let anything slide. They believed in getting it back in blood. On slow nights, they'd allegedly line up robberies on Wolfe Street Crips passing through their turf, hopping out, swarming them, and leaving them viciously beaten while stripping them of whatever they had, including a .22 automatic handgun. That tension is what really fueled the wave of shootings that tore through the 21st to 23rd Street area that summer. What started as a growing rivalry between Blood and Crip factions quickly turned into something way bigger as more sets from different sides began jumping in. Some aligning themselves under the Blood banner, others riding with the Crips, all adding fuel to an already volatile situation. But just like what had already been seen on the West Coast, the conflict didn't stay clean cut for long. Internal issues started creeping in. Egos, territory, and personal disputes began to outweigh any sense of unity. Before long, it wasn't just Bloods versus Crips anymore. The Bloods themselves were splintering, turning against each other and forming deep internal divides that made the streets even more unpredictable. One of the most serious fallouts came when tensions flared between the 21st Street Bloods and the 6 Deuce Brims. What may have started as a disagreement escalated fast, turning into a situation that couldn't be settled with words or a sit-down. A 6 Deuce Brim member linked up with a 21st Street Blood to talk about drug money, but the situation quickly turned tense. Out of nowhere, more 21st Street members started pulling up, grouping together like they were setting up an ambush to rob him. Sensing what was about to go down, the Brim member allegedly upped a handgun, aiming it toward the 21st Street Bloods before hitting the gas and taking off. That moment only added more fuel to an already boiling beef. The conflict spilled over into the streets, and alliances were tested as different blood sets were forced to pick sides. At the center of it all was a violent clash involving the 187 Southside Pirus and the 21st Street Bloods. According to accounts, the situation escalated to the point where a respected figure, referred to as a general within the Southside Pirus, was killed, an act that sent shockwaves through both sides. That moment didn't just mark another incident, it solidified a deep-rooted feud. From that point on, what was already a heated conflict turned into a long-standing war. Retaliation became expected, and the divide between those blood sets only grew deeper, creating a cycle of violence that didn't seem to have an end in sight. But the blood-on-blood rivalry wasn't anything new for the 5 Deuce villains. Out on the West Coast, they were already locked into a feud with the Pueblo Bishop Bloods. But for the 21st Street Bloods, this kind of internal war was unfamiliar territory, and it only made their situation worse. The Southside Pirus had built a reputation as Crip killers, but now with Bloods turning on each other, lines got blurred, and nobody really knew who they could trust anymore. The crazy thing is that even with the spike in gang violence, the police have repeatedly admitted that their role has been more about containing the violence than fully eliminating it. Residents described scenes that felt almost routine at the time. Groups of armed youths opening fire on passing vehicles, including incidents where children were caught in the crossfire. In one case, a 3-year-old girl was struck by a bullet reportedly meant for her father, a suspected gang member, narrowly surviving the wound. In another, mail delivery was temporarily suspended in the neighborhood after a bullet struck a postal truck. Elsewhere, multiple men were found shot to death in parked cars behind abandoned homes, believed to be tied to drug deals gone wrong, while other killings appeared to be retaliation for earlier disputes. In some areas of Little Rock, armed individuals openly asserted control over street corners. One figure, referred to locally as Daddy, was described sitting in a car at 14th and Booker, surrounded by younger armed associates who acted as lookouts for both police and rival groups. When a patrol unit passed, warnings were shouted through the area and movement slowed as people tried to avoid attention. During interviews, individuals involved in street activity spoke openly about violence, respect, and survival, while also claiming a desire to impose their own version of order in chaotic neighborhoods. Law enforcement, however, viewed this as part of an ongoing cycle of intimidation and retaliation rather than stability. By the 1990s, Little Rock had become widely recognized for its high homicide rate, at one point ranking above larger cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago in per capita killings. The year 1993 marked a peak with a record number of homicides, drawing national attention and even documentary coverage that exposed the severity of the crisis to a wider audience. As pressure mounted, city leaders, law enforcement, and community organizations responded with curfews, task forces, sentencing enhancements, and youth intervention programs. These efforts reduced violence from its peak levels, and in some neighborhoods, residents no longer had to take extreme precautions just to sleep safely at night. Still, officials warned that the underlying issues, poverty, drug markets, and cyclical retaliation, remain. Police intelligence officers describe gangs as highly adaptive, focused largely on drug revenue, and willing to treat law enforcement presence as little more than a temporary obstacle. Former Blood and Crip gang affiliated individuals also describe the contradictions of street life, where money gained through illegal activity was sometimes used to support families or community members, even while the same activity contributed to broader harm in those same neighborhoods. At the center of the narrative stood longtime figures who had cycled in and out of prison, some of whom later returned to community programs or public-facing roles. Their stories reflected both personal transformation and the lasting impact of decades of violence. And while the city eventually moved past its most intense years of bloodshed, the story of that era remains a reminder of how quickly street conflict can grow beyond control, and how long its effects can last, even after the gunfire fades. This is Arkansas Bangin. We tell the stories of those who aren't here to speak for themselves. No disrespect, no harm intended, just truth from a life I've actually lived. If you got stories you want me to cover, tap into the Bangin' in Little Rock subreddit so we can start getting things moving.